All right, hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Professor G here, and today we're going to be talking about a very interesting subject, and that is the Enlightenment. Now, this may seem a bit strange at first. It may seem a bit out of place because essentially, the Enlightenment is something that occurs in Europe beginning in about the 5th century AD, beginning with today what we call the Scientific Revolution. And it is primarily a European phenomenon. However, despite this fact, it is the Enlightenment that is going to greatly influence the American Revolution. So at this point in time, we're kind of transitioning into talking about the American Revolution. And what I want to focus on, again, different historians focus upon different subject matters and different areas when they deal with topics as large as the American Revolution. What I'm going to focus on is the political aspect of the revolution. Now, I'm not talking about like Democrat versus Republican political. Instead, what I'm talking about is political philosophy. That is, dealing with questions of what sort of government is the best government. The early American founding fathers, these are the primary questions that they had to deal with. These are very important questions. What form of government, what type of government were they going to establish? And when asking these questions, the place they turned to are the philosophers and the early theologians and the scientists of the European Enlightenment. In fact, as we'll see, the primary philosophical influence on the founding of what today we consider to be the American government are English philosophers, specifically Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. And we'll talk about those philosophers in the next lecture. However, in this lecture, I want to give you a broader historical context to talk about what the Enlightenment was and its ramifications for the American Revolution. So when we talk about the Enlightenment, I like to begin with the scientific revolution of the 15th century, which doesn't necessarily have too much to do with American politics, but it sort of sets the stage, so to speak. And what it sets the stage for is an overturning of traditional European ideas, specifically the philosophy of Aristotle. Within science, the scientific findings of another Greek thinker and philosopher named Ptolemy. But specifically what we're talking about is an overthrowing of the medieval worldview, the sort of intellectual understanding of the world, the medieval intellectual understanding of the world, the medieval paradigm. When we begin speaking about the Enlightenment, we're talking about an overthrowing of the medieval paradigm. And this begins with the Copernican revolution in the 15th century. Nicholas Copernicus is the first European to suggest that the sun is the center of the universe. He does this not through traditional forms of argumentation, not through appealing to Aristotelian causation, but rather through mathematical arguments. And so the scientific revolution is going to set the stage for a more broader change in thought, because the scientific revolution for the first time undermines Aristotelian cosmology. By doing so, it paves the way for new sorts of thinking. All other thought after the scientific revolution now has to be reevaluated to see if we can still come to the same conclusions that we did in the past. So this is what the Enlightenment sort of embodies, a violent overthrow of the old way of thinking, an introduction into new ways of thinking, and justification for those ways of thinking. Beginning with the scientific revolution, Well, really, you can go even further back and talk about the Protestant Reformation and how that changed our understanding of the Scripture, which is also extremely important, but kind of outside the bounds of this lecture and this class. So we're going to be dealing specifically with what comes after the scientific revolution, what's generally referred to by most historians as the Enlightenment, a general intellectual movement. Although it's an intellectual movement, it has very serious and very practical effects, especially in the realm of politics, as we'll see. So the Enlightenment is a period in the history of Western thought and culture stretching roughly from the mid-decades of the 17th century through the 18th century. Enlightenment ideas and ideals will be carried into the 19th century as well. Enlightenment thought culminates in the political upheaval of the French Revolution. This is the practical, I talked about the practical effects of the Enlightenment. This kind of culminates in the French Revolution. It also includes the English Revolution and the American Revolution, as we'll see. The Enlightenment begins with the scientific revolution, as we previously discussed. The dramatic success of science, the success of science and its ability to explain the natural world using mathematics, the success of science and accounting for a wide variety of phenomena by appealing to a relatively small number of elegant mathematical formulas. So it was reasoned, if we can explain the natural world so elegantly, perhaps it's time to reevaluate our other areas of thought, such as theology, such as politics, such as how we structure our civil societies. All of these undergo a radical transformation. The motto of the Enlightenment, the ideal of the Enlightenment, is summed up in the words of this gentleman here, the 19th century German philosopher, Immanuel Kant. And Immanuel Kant says that the spirit of the Enlightenment is this phrase, dare to know. Dare to know. All forms of knowledge have taken new shape. And so we have to come to a new understanding of reality, a new understanding of politics, a new understanding of philosophy, a new understanding of sociology, biology, astronomy. So this motto, dare to know, is what's supposed to give us the courage to go out there, to do the footwork that's necessary to rebuild up these fields of knowledge. Have the courage to use your own reason. Okay, typically speaking, the Enlightenment is divided into three general time periods. You don't really need to know these. I'll just kind of be talking about the history of the Enlightenment in chronological order. That's why I put these up here. And three general themes. We have the true here, science, epistemology, and metaphysics. We'll deal with some central themes in this. And our focus is not so much in this lecture, but especially in lectures to come, our focus is going to be the good, what's called the good, political and ethical and religious theory. Specifically for us, new developments in politics, new developments in political philosophy. Again, by political philosophy, we mean questions concerning government as a whole, not necessarily like what to do with our taxes or anything like that, but more along the lines of what is the best sort of government. Okay, so political theory and the beautiful. There were a lot of developments in aesthetics, in the field of aesthetics, a lot of development in the arts. The arts also undergo a massive change, not just like painting, but also the musical arts, development of ballets, of performance art. So it affects not only science, but all other areas of knowledge. Okay, so when we speak of the Enlightenment, there's not one single kind of place and time we can point to and say, yeah, that's the Enlightenment right there. The Enlightenment is happening all across Europe. It's happening in different places and in different subject areas, and it's happening in different ways from place to place. It varies. Right. The Enlightenment has several sort of intellectual precursors that sort of paved the way, like Francis Bacon and Thomas Hobbes, as we'll talk about. And again, this makes it possible to speak of the French Enlightenment, the English Enlightenment, the Scottish Enlightenment. The Enlightenment it can be summed up in a general idea, right? Dare to know, have the courage to go into these new fields. But it can't be limited to a particular place. This is happening all over the place and in all sorts of different disciplines. Individual Enlightenment thinkers often have very different approaches. We see the development of a fragmented philosophical landscape. Since Aristotle has been dethroned, people are now competing for the best way to understand the world. So you have the introduction of new philosophical schools. Perhaps most importantly, this general division that occurs between Enlightenment era philosophers of the Rationalist school on the one hand and the empirical or the empiricist school on the other, who emphasize different approaches to knowledge, as we will soon see. So, although the Enlightenment's happening in different places, although different people are applying it to different fields of thought, the two kind of common themes of the Enlightenment, the two general ideas that unite all of these thinkers and throughout their different geographical locations, is first of all, a rational questioning. This rational questioning is applied to all forms of knowledge. So during the scientific revolution, it's applied to the science of astronomy, but now it's applied to political theory, it's applied to theology, it's applied to all the other natural sciences like chemistry and biology and geology, right? This sort of rational questioning, this rational spirit in which you want to investigate, to reinvestigate the foundations of these fields. And second, a belief in progress through dialogue. Belief in progress through dialogue. The idea that starts to develop during the Enlightenment is that we as human beings, our collective knowledge is gradually increasing. We're knowing and learning more and more about the world around us, more and more about ourselves, our anatomy, the civil structure of our society, that we're gradually accumulating knowledge. And in this sense, it can be said that we are progressing as people, as a collective whole, not just as an individual. That's promoted through dialogue. So this is something interesting that happens, and that is the reliance on communication, specifically the reliance on letters. A lot of these Enlightenment era thinkers have massive correspondences with other people. And for the first time, due to technological reasons, this is possible. Now it's possible during the Enlightenment, due to advances in naval technology, if you're living in Britain, to communicate with somebody who's living in Russia, for say. Now, according to, by our standards, this would take perhaps a month or so. By our standards, that's really, really slow. But for them, it's a new rapid form of communication, the correspondence, right? These giants of philosophy finally begin communicating with one another. They're building off of each other. They're bouncing ideas off of each other. Okay, so let's talk about developments in epistemology and metaphysics. So this era is dedicated to human progress, the advancement of the natural sciences, the quest to provide a metaphysical framework. Metaphysics, I don't know if we've ever spoken about before. So again, the basic medieval worldview, which was heavily influenced by Christianity on the one hand and the writings of the Greek philosophers on the other, especially the Greek philosopher Aristotle, all that has kind of been undone. And so they're looking for a new framework to kind of base all of their knowledge upon. Now, they never come to a consensus, but there is a search for kind of a general way to interpret the world, because the old way is now gone. So we're looking for a new way to interpret the world. And these three positions, these three epistemological positions, remember, epistemology is the study of knowledge. So these three positions of how to understand the world, the way in which we can understand the world, these three positions developed during the Enlightenment. And these positions continue to have a deep impact on Western thought. They most certainly had a deep impact on early American thinkers, all of whom are familiar with these ways of thinking. Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, even George Washington, James Madison, all are well read in Enlightenment era philosophy. Okay, so they would be well familiar with these ideas. So we have the development of rationalism, and we'll talk about these more in depth in the slides coming up. But rationalism, generally speaking, as the name suggests, is the application of reason, the placing human reason, our ability to rationally think and to logically deduce, placing and evaluating human reasoning above all other forms of knowledge, even above sensory knowledge. The rationalists would say we can trust our reasoning more than our senses, because sometimes our senses deceive us. On the other hand, as opposed to the rationalist, you have the empiricist. The empiricists emphasize empirical knowledge that we gain through the senses. So the rationalists emphasize the human intellect, the empiricists emphasize knowledge gained through the senses. And then finally, we have the arrival of skepticism, as sometimes used as a tool for coming to certain knowledge, or just skepticism applied to general fields of knowledge, such as scientific skepticism or even religious skepticism. And we'll talk more in depth about these now. Rationalism owes its beginnings to the French philosopher René Descartes. René Descartes is the first to develop an overtly rationalistic worldview. Again, rationalism regards reason, human reason specifically, as the chief source and test of knowledge. Reason as the chief source of knowledge. It's where we get our most secure knowledge from. René Descartes undertakes to establish the sciences, the natural sciences, upon a secure metaphysical foundation. Descartes wants to establish what he calls his universal mathematics. Descartes wants to reduce all of the natural sciences, such as astronomy, physics, geology, biology. He wants to reduce all of the natural sciences to a mathematical basis. Why? Because according to Descartes, mathematics is the most secure form of knowledge. And according to Descartes, mathematics isn't empirical, right? You don't see mathematics. It's not like you go on a walk through the woods and you bump into the letter 8, or the number 8, right? You don't see numbers out there, okay? According to Descartes, they are purely rationalistic constructs. It doesn't make them any less true, right? According to Descartes, they are the most true form of knowledge. But it's rationalistic in the sense that the basis of scientific understanding is math, and math is inherently rationalistic. So rationalism holds that at least some forms of human knowledge is gained through a priori A priori. We're going to see a distinction. I think I have another slide fleshing out this distinction between a priori and a posteriori. So I'll explain what that means, but a priori means prior to experience. We can know mathematical truths prior to experience. Okay, I don't need to see mathematics in order to believe that it is in fact true. I just know it. 1 + 1 = 2. I don't have to see 1 and 2 out in reality. Right? It just makes sense to me, almost intuitively so. So knowledge is gained through, that some forms of knowledge is gained through purely through a priori prior to experience. It's a priori knowledge or rational insight as distinct from sense experience. So this is what we mean by rationalism. Worldview in which human reason is placed it's more basic than other forms of knowledge. Right, so mathematics is the foundation on which Descartes builds his entire philosophy, and mathematics is known solely through a priori reasoning or a priori knowledge. Okay, so let's talk about empiricism. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, so the two types of knowledge, and these are just fancy words here, and I'll explain what they mean. So a priori means before experience. So if I say I know something a priori, it means that I can know this thing without having to experience it. This is true for mathematics. This is also true for definitions, right? So I can say, for example, the definition of a bachelor is an unmarried man. I don't need to go out and actually see a bachelor, right? If you say so-and-so is a bachelor, I, by definition, know that he's unmarried. Okay, I don't have to meet the guy. I don't have to go around the world talking to all the bachelors to try to figure this out. I know it through definition. I know it through a priori reasoning, through a priori knowledge. On the other hand, a posteriori is knowledge that is gained through the senses, right? So to say that, say, for example, my podium is brown. My podium is brown. That's something that you have to sense. That's something that is reliant upon sensory information. You can't know whether or not my podium is brown unless you actually see it, or else it just won't make sense to you, right? Or else you won't be able to make a judgment about it. It has to be seen to believe, so to speak. Okay, so that's the basic difference. Now we can talk about empiricism. Empiricism in philosophy is the belief that all concepts originate in sense experience. All concepts originate in sense experience, that all concepts are about or applicable to things that can be experienced, or that all rationally accepted beliefs or propositions are justifiable or knowable only through experience. So again, it's not that these two positions are saying that knowledge can't be gained from experience, or that knowledge is only gained through reason alone, or that you can't know anything by definition by mathematics, right? It's not sort of this black and white thing. It's what sort of knowledge do you want to evaluate over the other. So for the empiricist, sensory knowledge gained from sense experience is evaluated over and against all forms of knowledge. My sensory experience, me being able to tell that this table is brown, is a more certain type of knowledge than my rationalistic understanding of the definition of a table. Okay? Sensory knowledge is a more powerful type of knowledge, according to the empiricist. Okay? Thus, empiricism is the view that all concepts or all rationally acceptable beliefs or propositions are a posteriori. Okay? So, in order for me to be rationally justified in my belief. Let's say, in order for me to be rationally justified in my belief in, say, unicorns, okay? So you take the proposition, unicorns are real. The empiricist would say the only way that you are justified in that belief is if you have actually experienced a unicorn. Since you have not experienced a unicorn, that belief is not justifiable, meaning you have no rational reason to believe in the existence of unicorns. Okay, and it's not just my own personal experience, but it is what is in the realm of empirical possibility. Okay? So it's not just relying upon the individual's experience, it's relying upon our collective experience as human beings, what is possible. All right, and the third form, the third epistemological position that develops during the Enlightenment is skepticism. Skepticism. Now, skepticism comes in many different forms. Unlike rationalism and empiricism, it's not as easily defined. But generally speaking, skepticism is a questioning attitude towards unempirical knowledge or certain beliefs or opinions that are stated as fact. But it's also a tool. For example, in his meditations on first philosophy, the philosopher that we mentioned previously, Rene Descartes, he uses skepticism to try to figure out what sort of knowledge that he actually has, to try to figure out what he actually knows. So skepticism sometimes is used as a tool in order to come to firm knowledge. The position of skepticism, there's different types. Again, there's different types. We have global skepticism. Global skepticism being the general view that you can't trust any forms of knowledge. Okay, so everything's up to be questioned. And then you have kind of local skepticism, more specific forms of skepticism, like religious skepticism or scientific skepticism. We'll come back to both of those. So global skepticism, if you trace the lineage of this sort of thinking, goes all the way back to ancient Greece, to a Greek philosopher named Pyrrho. Pyrrho was the first global skeptic, and according to a book called The Life of the Philosophers, Pyrrho questioned everything, right? Nothing presented to him, he wouldn't take anything presented to him at face value. He'd always question everything. So there's stories about Pyrrho walking around, and he's walking towards like the edge of a cliff, and his students have to run up and they say, no, don't keep walking, you're going to fall off the edge. And Pyrrho would say, yes, but how do I know that cliff is really there? So Pyrrho is a global skeptic, right? We would probably call these people crazy nowadays. But he's a global skeptic in that he questions everything, whether it's empirical, whether it's rational or mathematical, whatever it is, Pyrrho's questioning it. Now, you don't really see many global skeptics around. But what does start to emerge during the Enlightenment is kind of trends in philosophical skepticism that are applied to certain areas of knowledge. For example, you have religious skepticism. Religious skepticism is general skepticism applied only to religious claims, right? So the religious skeptic is typically hesitant to accept or to posit religious claims, right? The religious skeptic, anytime he hears something like God performing a miracle or talking about the existence of angels or ghosts and demons, all this other stuff, the existence of God, the religious skeptic applies the skeptical attitude towards those propositions, right? So you could be a religious skeptic and not be skeptic towards scientific claims, right? You may be able to say, well, scientific claims have have a firmer foundation than religious claims. So I'm a religious skeptic, right? Specifically speaking. So you have the rise of religious skepticism during the Enlightenment, and you also have kind of the reverse, the beginning of scientific skepticism. Now, typically speaking, philosophers like this gentleman here, Mr. David Hume was a religious skeptic, but not a scientific skeptic. So you have the religious pushback, the pushback by religious fundamentalists who took a view of scientific skepticism. Religious fundamentalists who say, no, I'm going to value, for example, I'm going to value the Bible, I'm going to value biblical claims over and against scientific claims. Right? So I'm going to believe biblical claims before I believe scientific claims. That's what we mean by scientific skepticism. And this emerges during the Enlightenment era kind of as a pushback to all of these developments in natural science. Natural science during this time, the natural sciences, especially astronomy, we're gaining a better and better understanding of the world, a better and better understanding of the universe. Right? And some people believed that this was taking the place of God, or perhaps was pushing God out of the picture. And some religious people didn't like that. And so you have the rise of scientific skepticism. Okay. So you have this general developing idea, the idea that everything in the universe could be rationally explained. So a sort of demystification of the world. The application of enlightenment, the kind of critical thinking that begins in the Enlightenment, the application of this critical thinking to all areas of knowledge. So this has an effect not just on the sciences, not just on philosophy, and we'll talk about this a bit more, but it also has an effect on religion. It changes the face of Christianity. I said before that some Christians push back against this. They want to say, no, I'm going to stick with the Bible, not your philosophy. But then you have more accommodating Christians that want to accept certain philosophical positions. And so you get attempts to reconcile the two, attempts to reformulate Christianity, or in some cases to kind of ditch Christianity, to ditch formal established religion and adopt something such as deism. We'll talk about this a bit later. So, before we talk about that, let's talk about the reforms that took place in the political sphere. So when I said that the medieval worldview is overturned, I mean every aspect of the medieval worldview is overturned. Not just Aristotle's writing on astronomy, but also Aristotle's writing on politics becomes questioned. And as far as the practical impact of the Enlightenment, as far as its physical effect on world society, it's with political theory that the Enlightenment has the most profound impact. Why? Because the Enlightenment era is marked by three major political revolutions, which today kind of lay the structure and the framework for our modern understanding of the political state of the nation. These are the English Revolution in 1688, the American Revolution, which will be our focus in later lectures in 1775, and finally the French Revolution in 1789. The English Revolution, also known as the Glorious Revolution, took place with the overthrow of King James by William of Orange, who was originally from the Netherlands. He's able to take King James II. William of Orange is from the Netherlands. He takes the English crown by force. William's successful invasion of England with the Dutch fleet and his army. With his army, he's able to overthrow King James. William has supporters in England. None of that, the details of this don't really concern us. What is interesting, though, and this is the point in which you see Enlightenment thought influence day-to-day politics. What's interesting about the Glorious Revolution is you have the introduction of the Bill of Rights. the introduction of the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was an act of the English Parliament. It deals with constitutional matters, it deals with the structure of the English government, but it also guarantees individuals, the common everyday person. It guarantees these individuals certain basic civil rights, certain rights that would now be protected by the government. It limits the power of the monarch, for example, sets out the rights of Parliament, establishes the freedom of speech in Parliament, the freedom to actually speak out against the king and not have your head on a stake. And it also lays out certain individual rights. And this is the first time that this has happened in Europe, and this is going to kind of lay the basis for what we're going to see happen in American politics with our Bill of Rights. Our Bill of Rights, however, is going to be a bit more comprehensive. Well, it's going to be way more comprehensive. So the American Revolution, as you probably know, is a conflict that arises between the American colonies. We talked in previous lectures about the establishment of American colonies. It's a conflict that's going to arise between these American colonies and the British Crown. Chief among the ideas of the American Enlightenment, and we will explore these concepts when we deal specifically with Hobbes, Locke, and also Thomas Paine in the Declaration of Independence. But it's really with the American Revolution that we get these ideas of liberalism, republicanism, and the fear of corruption, the balancing out of national government. You've heard of the phrase, the balance of power in the American government. Here in the Enlightenment is where these ideas come from. Okay, now we're going to move on and talk about the French Revolution. French Revolution is a far-reaching social and political upheaval in France that lasts from 1789 to 1799, and it's partially carried forward by this gentleman here, Napoleon, his expansion of the French Empire. The French Revolution is a bit different in that it's inspired by liberal and radical liberal ideas. The American Revolution is somewhat moderate compared to the French Revolution. The American Revolution, you have the establishment of certain basic civil rights, one of which is the freedom of religion. Religion is greatly challenged during the French Revolution. But the French Revolution is more important with regards to it has a domino effect, right? Because the Americans are rebelling against the French Empire. However, in the French Revolution, you have French people rebelling against the French Empire in a way that the other colonies, the French colonies that have been established in the New World that we talk about, they see this happening in mainland France and they follow suit. So it has a global domino effect, a decline of absolute monarchy, an overthrowing of the traditional traditional ideas of kingship, and unleashes a wave of global violence, global conflict. So what's really at stake here, what's kind of behind all of this, we talked about the overthrow of the medieval worldview. We have here the overthrow of a traditional understanding of a king and kingship. Traditionally speaking, the king was somebody who was put in charge of the country, who ruled the country with absolute power, and this absolute power to a greater or lesser extent was backed by God. The idea of divine right, the idea that a king was placed in his position by God, such that to rebel against the king would not only be to rebel against a physical person, but would also be to rebel against God. So it's kind of like a double whammy. You're doubly sinning, so to speak. But the Enlightenment questions this idea. It questions the legitimacy of kingship, and it questions the legitimacy of absolute rule. And this is what we see play out in the French Revolution. Okay, so very briefly, we'll get more in depth to this in my next lecture. Things change in the realm of political philosophy. This begins with a few people, but for us, we're going to begin talking about these changes with Thomas Hobbes. So the success at explaining the natural world that was experienced in the sciences is now applied to political thought, right? The same sort of logical scrutiny that went into the scientific revolution is now applied to politics. Is monarchy really the best form of government? Is it really okay that this king has absolute power? The existing social and political orders, it was found out that they did not withstand this sort of critical scrutiny. And traditional political and social authority, which was often kind of shrouded in religious myth and mystery, began to decline. People started to seriously question these sort of traditional political aspects of their society. So one of the first major political works in this vein is Thomas Hobbes and his Leviathan. Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan is a founding work in the Enlightenment political theory. Thomas Hobbes, an Englishman, very influential in the English Enlightenment. Thomas Hobbes introduces a very important political idea that is held by many during the Enlightenment and that has a profound impact on the establishment of the American government. And this is the idea of a social contract, what's called social contract theory, or a social contract model. Is a political authority is grounded in an agreement amongst individuals, each of whom aims in this agreement to advance his rational self-interest by establishing a common political authority. So you'll get more into this if you read Hobbes' Leviathan and when he talks about a state of nature. So people, according to Hobbes, you can kind of picture, this is more of a thought experiment. We're not talking about an actual historical place, but imagine a society in which government has broken down, in which there's no law, there's no rule. I like to use the example of The Walking Dead, for example. Society has collapsed. We're kind of living in this post-apocalyptic age. Just don't get too confused with the whole zombie thing. But society has collapsed. There's no rule. There's no government. Hobbes calls this a state of nature. There's nobody governing these people. There's no law that they have to follow. They kind of have to make their own way. Now, in the state of nature, Hobbes says, it's kind of like every man for himself, right? I'm trying to survive in the zombie apocalypse, so I have to secure my own food, my own water. I need the ammo, right, to fend off people. I'm looking out for myself first and foremost. However, what people realize is that there's always safety in numbers, right? Because eventually I have to sleep. When I'm sleeping, I'm completely defenseless. But if I have somebody watching my back, right, if we take shifts, then that makes us stronger. We are stronger as a community than we are individually. So the social contract is the idea that within the state of nature, eventually people realize this, eventually people realize that we're stronger working together. And so they agree to sacrifice certain rights, certain selfish desires in order to live and to maintain a society. Now, the upshot of all this, the implications for politics, is that society is formed not by some absolute ruler's power, not by the king forcefully maintaining society. Rather, society is structured and society is formed based off of the rational consent of the governed. Okay, society is formed because me and my friends have agreed to get together and have all agreed that we are going to sacrifice some of our own self-interest for the sake of living peacefully with one another and therefore having better protection. So this is what Hobbes means when he introduces this idea of social contract theory. And the implication, of course, is that government works from the bottom up. Okay? We as a people are the only thing that makes government work. Okay? Even in the United States, if every single person in the United States one morning woke up and said, yeah, this whole money thing, I don't buy it anymore. I'm not using it. That would have a disastrous effect on our economy. We give money power because we all agree upon the fact that it stands for our goods. We give the government power because we all agree that they are in fact our rulers, that they represent us somehow. If one day we all woke up and say, yeah, Congress, the president, we don't buy that anymore, they would no longer have power over us. Okay, so government works from the bottom up, not the top down. It's not the king who gives power to society, but it's the people who make up government. And it's the people who dictate whether or not that government is legitimate. And that idea originates with Hobbes. Next up, we have John Locke. And as you'll see in his second treatise of government, John Locke is the American philosopher. I mean, he's British. Don't get me wrong. He's a British citizen. He's writing in Britain. But it is John Locke who is going to form the foundation for United States politics, for United States political philosophy. Locke's going to provide a more positive view. Locke accepts all of Hobbes's basic positions, such as the social contract theory, but Locke's going to introduce two very important notions, and that's this notion of freedom and this notion of property. Freedom and property. And we'll talk about these a bit more in our lecture on Locke, but essentially Locke's going to say that yes, we do give up certain freedoms, but these freedoms are our natural rights. And if any government, no matter who it's run by, if any government tramples on these freedoms or imposes their own rule on these freedoms, the people have the right to rebel against that government. Also, what Locke's going to say is that we all have the right to property. Not only do we all have the right to property, but the primary function of government is to protect our right to property. Locke's going to say that this is, generally speaking, this is what the government is there for. The government is there to ensure that my money in the bank's protected, that my house is protected, that I'm protected, right? We don't want to be living in like a Mad Max type world where everyone's running around trying to kill each other. The purpose of the government is to provide this general order and this general stability and to protect me and my property, says Locke. That's what it's there for. And if it's not doing that role, then we should consider changing it. So this is what I talked about before. Unique to Locke is his developments of the idea of natural rights. And he also picks up this idea of social contracts theory, but as you'll see, I think, and perhaps you'll disagree with me on this, but I think there's some important differences there between Hobbes's idea of social contract theory and Locke's idea of social contract theory. But read those selections from the Leviathan and read Locke's selections from his treatise on government and see what you think. James Madison, the American politician and the eventual president, is also influenced by these ideas. We'll get more into this later, so this isn't terribly important right now. But Madison's going to pick up on these ideas and apply them to the idea of democracy, the representative democracy. Okay, so the religion and enlightenment. This is going to play a more important role when we begin our discussion of religion in American society. But here we kind of have the groundwork for it. And I've already hinted at this, and I've already sort of explained this. And this is the dichotomy that soon emerges. Basically what happens is that you have kind of two veins that start to emerge in Christianity. You have the vein that to a greater or lesser extent, depending upon the denomination and depending upon the thinker, the vein that wants to accommodate at some level the developments in science and the developments in philosophy, and the vein that is reacting against this, the vein that wants to push back, the vein that wants to be skeptical towards philosophical or scientific sentiments. And this leads to some very divergent paths in Christian denominations. And we'll talk more about those when we talk about, when we do our lecture on religion in early America. Okay, so that's going to be the end to this lecture, talking about the Enlightenment. So up next, we're going to talk about a bit more in depth about the political philosophy of Hobbes and Locke. All right, till next time, see you later.